Good day, everyone. My name is Maryann, and I'm happy to have you join me today. We've been talking in the past couple sessions about making blocks to do a sampler quilt, the 12-inch, 12 and a half inch before they're put into the quilt, and then they turn into 12-inch blocks. But today I thought I'd deviate a little bit. I'm doing a disappearing 9 patch, and this is what it looks like when it's done. Actually, you can make a great big quilt of it. You can make table runners. You can do a lot of different things with it and different arrangements. And I'll show you how as we go along. It's a very easy quilt to do, very easy block, and lots of fun. What we're going to do today is use charm squares. And a charm square is a 5-inch square, and they come in packages like this. You could also use yardage and cut yourself 5-inch squares. The other thing with this particular block is you can actually make it any size block that you want. You don't have to use the charm squares. You could use a 10-inch block, which is called a layer cake. You could make it a 5-inch block. You can make it a 7-inch block. You can do whatever you want. Now, this I said was made with the 5-inch charm squares. But if you want it to look a lot bigger, you could always use something in a different size. The thing is, you need to have 9 blocks of equal size. So whatever size you decide to use, you need 9 blocks. The center block over here should be less busy than your other blocks. The 4 corner blocks are going to not be cut when you do the blocks, so those should be your prettiest blocks. And the middle, the 4 blocks in between the corners are going to be cut in half when you're making it. So those, you don't want any directional prints. You can use flowers, you can use whatever, but no directional prints to do it. So you need to be careful about the directional. I think I told you everything else that's on there. Let's get started. Now I've actually gotten some of my charm squares together to start with. And you'll see I have 3 sets of 3, and that's what you're going to do. You're going to take your 3 blocks and put them together. And you're going to do that with all your sets. So you're going to have 3 rows of 3 blocks. It's important to press the seams. We're using 1/4-inch seams, and I use a 1/4-inch foot to help me get the seams even, but there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Your sewing machine may have the 1/4-inch marking. The other thing I've seen people do is take like a little pad like this. You could just even take masking tape and figure out where the 1/4-inch seam is on your machine and put a marker there so that you would have it. Normally, you press towards the darker fabrics. With something like this, I can press either way, but I definitely wanted to go the opposite way of the center block, which is going to be this. So the center block, because of what it looks like, I'm going to press to the outside. So this one, I'm going to press to the inside so that the seams will nest and there won't be any bulkiness. Now that I've pressed the seams, I'm going to go ahead and press them to the inside. Okay, now I'm going to do the middle set of blocks, and I'm going to go ahead and set them with the iron first. And then I'm going to press them towards the outside. I brought some Best Press with me today, which is a great way to get a nice crisp seam. If you just barely spray it a little bit, it just gives you a really nice texture, and it makes your seams come out nice and even. Okay. So that block is ready. And you can actually see the difference between the one I used Best Press and the one that I didn't. I just realized I pressed this one seam here in the opposite direction of what I wanted. I'm going to go ahead and spray this one that I did first too, just to get it a little more crisp. So that did make a nicer seam. All these blocks that I'm using are from the same design pack there, so that's why they kind of go together really well. Okay, and again, I'm going to now press these towards the inner block. Okay, so now we're ready to join the 3 rows. This row has a less busy design in the middle. It's going to be my middle row. And the other 2 rows you can put in any direction you want depending on the colors in your fabric and all. Okay. What I'm going to do next is go ahead and pin the 3 rows together, matching the seams so that they will nest really well with each other. I'm going to take each block, and you'll see now this row is going to the outside, this row is going to the inside. So I'm going to go ahead and try to match that seam and put a pin to hold it. Some people will just eyeball it. I like to have a pin. That looks like the 2 seams will come out pretty well together. If one of your strips of fabric tends to be a tiny bit longer than the other one, what you can do is put that one on the bottom as you're sewing, because the sewing machine will tend to make that one come a little bit shorter than the other one. You try to get your seams as close as possible, but they don't have to be perfect. Okay, and that looks like it's going to match pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch foot all the way down. I'm actually using a 1/4 inch foot on my sewing machine, and I'll show you what it looks like. It looks like this, and it has a little blade on the side, and if you run your fabric right along that blade, you'll have a 1/4 inch seam, and all your seams with the different parts will match up. If you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, you could always put a piece of tape where the 1/4 inch mark is. I think I mentioned before, you could use a pad and tape it on so that it gives you a ridge to run your fabric by, or you can eyeball it. I do like to use the 1/4 inch foot though. Now this particular block is not going to be one of the blocks that you're using in your sampler quilt, because it will not be a 12.5 inch block or a 12 inch block in the front. It's going to be something where you would use the same pattern for a whole quilt top. Okay, come on in, look up. There we go. Always pull your thread toward the back of the machine. We're ready to sew. Now this block is going to be sewn onto either sashing, which is a strip of fabric in between the block, or it'll be sewn to another block. So you don't need to backstitch at the beginning, but I like to just to give it some stability so it doesn't start coming apart. The other thing I would strongly suggest is that you press your seams and then iron them after each section that you do. And that way, if there's any problem with the way the seams came out, you can take care of it before you put the next layer. If you have a newer sewing machine, it might actually already come with Otherwise, you get them at most quilt shops. You can get them on Amazon. There's different places you can get them. Okay, I'm just setting these seams so they'll be nice and flat. I'm going to trim these threads that are hanging from here. And I'm going to go ahead and press it open. And I'm going to press it to the outside. And I do tend to press both the top and bottom, and I like to look just to make sure all my seams are going the way they should. I'm going to give this a little bit of less press, and then I'll show you what it looks like. If you're a beginner sewer, you might want to take little sticky notes or pins or whatever you want to use. I like to use sticky notes and mark row 1, row 2, row 3 so you don't get confused as you're sewing. So this is what it looks like so far. And as you can see, my intersections are pretty good on this one. If they aren't really good, it's your choice whether you want to be a perfectionist and take it apart and do it again, or if you want to just leave it. And if they're just a little bit off, I tend to just leave it. Okay. Now this row, we're going to go ahead and sew to the bigger section here. And so you want to make sure that you know which way you're putting it. You don't want to put it here because it'll look too busy. You want to put it on the other side so that you have kind of the planer block in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that now. Again, I'm going to go ahead and nest the seams. That means putting the seams together with one of the pieces going one way and one going the other way and making sure they look like they're going to match. That looks pretty good. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead to the machine again and sew this. A lot of machines are self-threading. They have some kind of threader attached to them. This machine I have to thread myself. And because the needle holes are so small, what I do with that is I take a little piece of white paper, I'll show you in a few minutes, and I put it behind the needle, and it makes that hole where you want to thread it so much more visible. Makes it a lot easier to thread your machine. Get this pin out of my way. There we go. You don't want to sew over pins because it will surely break your needle. And even though I have these seams pinned down so they'll match, I tend to hold them in place when I take the pin out to make sure they don't shift. A couple stitches back. I'm going to go ahead and cut the thread. Here's what it looks like now. Seams are matching pretty good. And this is a 9 patch. And the way I'll show you in a few minutes how we're going to make it disappear. Setting the seams. And then I'm going to press them towards the outside. See, I look at the back and there's one seam that went the wrong way when I was pressing, so I'm going to put it the right way. So you make sure all your seams are caught. Make sure that they're all going the direction you want. And you're ready to make your 9-patch disappear into a block that you can use in a quilt. And as I said, you can actually do a whole quilt top with the same block. You don't have to have any other blocks. You can do it with the same block, and that would look similar to the table runner I did. People sometimes use sashing. I would preferably not use sashing with this particular block. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to make the cut up and down. So you're going to remeasure the block now that you've sewn it and see how wide it is, and you're going to come right in the middle of the block and cut it this way and then this way. Okay, now that I've sewn those 9 blocks together, my middle block is exactly 4.5 inches, which is what it should be, because we started with 9 inches and we used 1/4 inch on each side, so that took a 1/2 inch off the block, and I have a 4.5 inch center. So I'm going to put my ruler to make it, and as you can see, the ruler has 1/8 inch lines, 1/4 inch lines. I'm going to do it so I'm cutting right in the middle of the 4.5 inches. So I'm going to be doing 2 1/4. So I'm going to put my ruler on the 2 1/4 line. Another saying I learned when I first started quilting is measure twice and cut once. So make sure you have it right where you want it. And my ruler does have the 1/4 line, so it's really easy for me to figure out. Okay, so we have it cut in half now, and we're going to cut it the other way. So again, I'm going to measure my block, make sure it's the 4.5 inches, which it is. So I'm going to cut in the middle of that, and I'm going to have 4 quadrants when I'm done. Looks like I'm getting ready to need a new blade. It should be cutting a little smoother than that. Got 2 of the quadrants done, and I'm going to cut the next 2. Okay, here's my last 2. Now I have all 4 quadrants, and it's a job to put it together. The nice thing about this block is you don't have to keep matching seams, especially if matching seams are hard for you. So there's a couple different ways you can put it together. One way I like to do is lay my first block down and just keep rotating the blocks. Okay, so with this particular design, there's 2 little blocks in the middle and then the 2 at the end. There's no further seams to match other than sewing the blocks together. Your seam from here does not need to match a seam from here because it's on this side and vice versa. So this is one way to design it. You can use all different patterns. You could do this way, but then that means you've got to match seams. I would not do this way because that's the same way it was before we cut. You could actually do it this way. Let's see how we can do that and that would kind of give you a different look. And again, this way, you're not matching seams. Okay, so that would be another look if you like that look better. So we're going to go ahead and sew these 4 quadrants together, and you'll have your disappearing 9 patch. Let's see, I think I'm going to do 9 this way. Let me get them to where I want them. This way. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and take them to my sewing machine and sew it out. Just be careful when you're sewing them again that your seam from the previous block is going in the right direction, either up or down. Going to go ahead and press this, making sure all my seams went the right way. Press this one to the right side, then I'm going to press the next one to the left side. You just alternate because all the fabrics are kind of the same hue. Now I'm going to take these 2 blocks and sew them together. It's not right. That's not how I want it. Just the other thing I usually do, and you may have noticed, is I like to set my machine so that it's always stopping with the needle down. In case I stop, I don't want my fabric to slip out. I want it to stay in place. I use it with the needle down so it holds my fabric in place. Okay, I'm going to press this. And this other one was pressed to the right, so this one I'm going to press to the left. Okay, we're going to sew these 2 sections together and we'll have our disappearing 9 block. Okay. When I come to an intersection, I try to hold the seams down so that the top and bottom seam will mesh. You could actually press this seam in either direction because your fabrics are about the same degree of darkness either way. Okay, so you press your block really well, and here's your disappearing line patch. And you could make as many of these as you want to make a whole quilt top. That's our project for today. Thank you for being with me.